early on in my career, I was terrible at all of these things I'm describing. Okay. That's why I know these things work, because I was very emotionally connected to my work early on in my career. I would argue. I wanted my solution. I wanted it my way. I would even go into meetings, and if it was something that I didn't think was valuable, I would knock out the work during that meeting, send it out 15 minutes in, and leave. Okay. Very abrasive, very direct, not a good team player. Okay. This was me early on in my career. I was also very emotionally volatile to what I felt like was being slighted. If somebody tried to micromanage me, I got really agitated. I would potentially yell or raise my voice or get frustrated or leave a room. If somebody came after me and tried to get me to do something that was really, really detail oriented, or they were being really nitpicky, but in the end, the solution stayed the same, I got really frustrated, didn't see the value in it, tended to be very reactionary. The same was true if I was trying to have if somebody came at me or I felt like they were putting up a roadblock for what I was trying to accomplish. I could potentially fly off the handle on them. I could escalate to my boss, right? All of the wrong reactions you can think of. This is how I started my career. Okay. And I always find it interesting because people that I've worked with before sometimes will be surprised that this is what I do for a living now. And it's because I had to learn all of these skills in order to progress in corporate. Welcome back to Secrets of a Corporate Game. So many people are trying to navigate a corporate world that is laden with secrets, cleverly hidden and unspoken rules to a game that most employees don't even know they're playing. On this podcast, we try to give you a peek behind the curtain and unveil some of those secrets with tips and tricks that you can apply today to start taking control of your career and progress up the ladder faster. Welcome back, lovelies. I'm so excited for today's episode. Excited to be back with you guys. Today, we are going to be talking about creating a little bit of emotional distance in work and how it relates to interpersonal conflict and navigating relationships with all of these interesting personalities that we come into contact with within the corporate world. Today, we're going to jump in and talk about what does it mean to create emotional distance? What are some tactical tools that you can use to create that distance for yourself? And then ultimately, how does this come into play when we are facing off with our counterparts or other individuals at work who may be getting on, let's just say, that last nerve? So first, creating emotional distance is important in our careers because it keeps us from investing too much of ourselves into our job. So part of this comes back to our identity and who we are. It's very common for a lot of our identity to be founded in what we do for work, partially because we spend so much time at our office doing our jobs, but partially because we feel it's representative of how successful we are, how much money we make, or how good we think we can execute a certain thing. And in order to create emotional distance in our work, first, our identity needs to be separate from our job. Now, this is easier said than done, and I've talked about this on previous episodes before. But ultimately, who you are is not the same as your work title. In order to create that separation, though, we have to have other interests, other hobbies, other passions that allow us to find ourselves separate from the work that we do. So if you're struggling with this, if you think, well, so much of my identity is in that I work my job 50, 60 hours a week, it's so much of who I am, taking that step back doesn't mean we need to add more titles. So especially when I talk with women, but even men, a lot of the time, who we are becomes an amalgamation of the titles that we carry. We are a director of IT. We are a mom. We are a spouse. We are a blank. And when we start to think of ourselves in terms of just the title, we lose the essence. And so who you are is broader than just the things you do and the titles you hold. So in order to create emotional distance, we have to have an identity that is separate. So here's how you create that identity. So first, I think it's really important to understand what negative preconceived notions that we have about ourselves. If this is something you struggle with, I recently read the book Worthy by Jamie Kern-Lima, and I think she does a really good job of explaining how to do this. But ultimately, there are all of us have insecurities that we struggle with, right? All of us have things that we worry about that take up our brain space at 2 a.m. while we're laying in bed, right? And writing those down, those assumptions we have about ourselves, those insecurities we have about ourselves, clearly articulating them is really the first step to being able to overcome them, right? So some of my insecurities are that I'm not a good enough mom, right? I work a lot, okay? I have my business, I run a corporate job, Part of it is that I think my business won't be successful, right? I think this is a common entrepreneur struggle. Part of it is I feel I'm not giving enough at work because I have these other interests, right? When you think of what are your insecurities, what are the things you struggle with, what are those core beliefs you have about yourself that hold you back, then we can start to create affirmations that offset them. So for me, I have 9 affirmations, I think it's 8 or 9 affirmations every single day that I journal and say out loud that are there to help me understand and come to peace with the version of myself that I want to be. So for example, I tend to tie a lot of my self-worth to how productive I am. Right? This is part of why our identities get tied to our work, is because we want to be productive. We want to do all the things. And if we're sitting around doing nothing, that inherently feels uncomfortable to me. So one of my affirmations is that I prioritize rest well. And since I've started this affirmation process, I have found more places where I can say, you know what? I'm not going to log on late tonight. I'm just going to rest. I'm just going to read a book. I'm just going to take a nap. Right? And so as we start to say these affirmations and write these affirmations, they become a key part of our beliefs. That will start to separate us from our career. One of your affirmations, if this is something you really struggle with, might be, my success is not limited to my career. Maybe that's enough to start saying to yourself to start to get comfortable with that. So to create this identity, we want to separate ourselves from work. We want to identify those insecurities that we have, and we want to create corresponding affirmations that go with them that help us find that comfortability and step out of that insecurity. Once we've done that, then the next level is I want us to look at the interests we have outside of work. In adulthood, a lot of our interests are tied to money, right? I like to eat. That costs a lot of money right now. Okay. You may like to shop. You may like to play golf. You may like to go rock climbing. But all these things we somewhat tie back to our financial situation, right? It's very rare that we're doing a free hobby, right? And so when we think of our identity, it's easy to come back to like, well, I don't have time for hobbies because I have to work, because I have to make money. But all of us need an outlet, right? One of my favorite hobbies is just to color outside, right? Be in nature, spend some time coloring. It's mindless. I can't think about anything else. I can't stress myself out over my next work deliverable or the next deadline that I have to hit or something going on with the client. Instead, I can focus on just being in the peace. Right? So what are those hobbies that you have that separate yourself? I compete for Mrs. Colorado every year. That is a passion of mine. It allows me to volunteer, get out of my community, raise money for different causes, and represent my state. And I enjoy that. That is a separate part of my identity from my career. Obviously, I am a mom. I like to do things with my kids. I like to be present with them. I'm a spouse. So figure out what are all of your hobbies? What are all of the interests that you have outside of work? And a lot of times when I work with clients through this exercise, I'll say, well, I don't have time. I don't do anything else. For your mental health, you have to do something else. Okay, I know this is a career podcast, but I'm never going to be the person to tell you you need to work longer hours, you need to go to work earlier, stay later. There are times and seasons for that, but the reality is that if you do not have an outlet that is of interest to you, that makes you happy, you're going to burn out, right? And this has a much greater impact on your mental health. I have a client who recently took up dancing. She's like, I'm terrible. I don't really do it the right way, but it brings me so much joy, and it's a great way for me to disconnect after a long work day. That's wonderful. Find what those hobbies are. And then your identity becomes a combination of these affirmations of who you're becoming, this future self that you're ideating, and these hobbies that make up more of you than your job. When you feel comfortable in that, it's a lot easier to take a step back and give yourself a little bit of space from your career. Early on in my career, I was very emotionally attached to everything I did. I'm a high achiever, I'm type A, and I would get in arguments with my leadership if I thought they weren't doing the right thing. And what I've realized over the course of my career is in the end, it's their prerogative to do something different than what we think is the right choice. They may be right? And I may be right. But in the end, arguing with them, saying that they're wrong, telling them no, it doesn't help any of us grow. It doesn't help any of us get to a better solution. It's not to say that we don't voice our concerns, but in the end, your success, your ability to do your job, your ability to be a high performer, your ability to X is not tied to your project. It's not. And it's really easy for us to get wrapped up in that. If you're able to create that emotional distance and say, I'm comfortable with this work not being my choice, but I'm still going to execute it well, You're going to create a much better safe space for you in that working environment. It's also going to help you build better relationships. It's going to help you take a step back when we're very emotionally tied. And so the first part of creating emotional distance at work is tying our feelings of satisfaction to only the work we have direct control over, right? So we don't ultimately control if our boss decides to follow our idea or not, right? We may propose 3 options. They pick option C. We recommended option B. We can say, hey, I do have some risks with this. We articulate them. They say, don't care. I want to go with option C. And we say, great. And we execute option C to the best of our ability because that's what we have control over, right? That allows emotional distance. Huge thank you to today's sponsor for our episode, Symposia Academia. They assist individuals to get into cybersecurity, and you do not need a degree or any prior work experience. They'll help you land a GRC analyst position in cybersecurity with their 4-step process, which includes training, an internship, interview preparation, and then on-the-job support. In order to get started, go ahead and head over to the link www.symposia.com/channel-partner/KB-3. You can also find this link down in the show notes, but again, it is symposia.com/channel-partner/KB-3 and check them out. But we're not emotionally connected to option B just because it was our preference. It is up to us to determine how we execute our work, how we apply our skills. But a lot of the time in our career, it's not actually up to us which option is chosen, right? So when we're in this practice of building emotional distance, we want to be committed to doing the best work that we can, but we don't want to be so invested in our proposed solution that it detracts from our ability to build relationships and execute on that work. So the first part of building emotional distance is really seeing optionality as a key part of our process. Hey, I'll give you 3 options. You can pick what you want. I will execute on any of them, rather than having a die-hard way forward. Additionally, it's important for us as we start to move into this space of emotional distance is to be committed to executing great work, regardless of what the work is. Now, this doesn't mean we shouldn't advocate for ourselves, share our opinions, articulate risks of going in a certain path. But in the end, unless you are the CEO, and even then, a lot of the time it's not up to us to make ultimate decisions. And so we get so invested in what we believe is the right course of action that we allow it to detract from all of our other skills. So the first step in emotional distance is optionality and committing to results rather than a specific path forward. The second piece of creating emotional distance in the workplace is related to how we interact with other people. And this really requires understanding the mindset piece of what's happening in the workplace. A lot of the time we think about our priorities, about what we need to do, and we put metaphorical blinders on, right? We care about what we're trying to do. And when other people don't help us, they don't get us what we need, they put up roadblocks, we instantly get defensive because they become a roadblock in our ability to execute what we believe is, again, the right path or the right work. But the reality is everybody has blinders on. That person who's pushing back on what you want them to do is pushing back because whatever it is we're asking about doesn't align with their objective. And so a lot of the time, we have to be able to take a step back, create some emotional separation, and instead focus on what is it that they need to achieve and how does that relate to what we are trying to accomplish. Those two things go together. If you are in marketing and you need something done and tech is being difficult about it because it doesn't align with their prioritization or it doesn't align with their goals, we need to understand what do they need from us in order for this to get prioritized? What are their current goals set? Can this align to what they're currently working on? Do they need funding and resourcing? Taking the time to understand the other perspective will ultimately allow us to get done what we need to get done faster or come up with potentially a better solution. So when it comes to interpersonal, there's group events, right? There's group projects where maybe we need everybody aligned and it's a discussion and it's collaborative. We need to understand their perspective. That can happen that way. But something that I find is really common is especially when we're facing difficulty with a peer, when we're facing, I'm going to call it a combat phase where maybe they keep doing something that we don't like and we've asked them to stop, or they're stealing credit for our work, or they are really going anti to the goals of the team, but only to you, things like that. One-on-one conversation is the best way to start to mitigate those issues. But we can't go in really high on our own emotional response. We have to go in from a perspective of wanting to learn what it is they are trying to accomplish and to find common ground. Empathy goes a long way. So in these situations, I'll make up an example. There's individuals I've worked with in the past where maybe they're really short on emails, or they want really, really over the top documentation for certain parts of the process, and it's really slowing things down. Rather than get agitated, rather than have an emotional connection to the process and start to say, hey, well, you guys can't do this, or I'm just not going to help you, or whatever, we have a one-on-one meeting. We say, listen, what are you trying to accomplish with this? I need to understand your goals with this information so that I can best support you from my perspective. Because the way things are now, this is creating too much of a time drain on my side for me to be able to help you the way that you guys need. So what is it exactly that we're looking for? That can be a 15-minute conversation that fixes a ton of issues, right? So emotional distance starts with optionality, connecting ourselves more to delivering results rather than a specific path forward. Then it progresses into, in the interpersonal and the communication with the individuals, how do we understand what they're trying to do, what their goals are, and how we can best support them from our position in order to start to chip away at some of those issues. Now, there will always be toxic people we work with where we talk to them, we have a good conversation, hey, this is what I need, everybody is all aligned, and then the next day they go right back doing what they were going to do. This will always happen. And there is a time where we're going to escalate to our boss and say, hey, I could use some support with this. We had a conversation. It doesn't seem to be landing. There's always going to be those paths for future escalation. But on the whole, most people, when we start to feel friction with another individual, our natural reaction is to shy away from it. We stop meeting with them. We don't want to face off with them because we have emotions invested in this relationship that are now negative. But if we can create that distance and say, hey, we all need to get work done. Let me try to understand why they're doing this, where they're coming from. We may not always agree with the actions they take, but we can get to a better position to understand their perspective. And that will ultimately allow us to work together better in the future. So that's that second piece of creating emotional distance. And then the last piece of creating emotional distance is being prepared. Okay. We all have triggers in the workplace. And I think sometimes that's a phrase that gets overused. And that's not to say that people don't have them. It's just to say that I feel like a lot of times we're like, that was a very triggering call. And maybe it's because she was wearing pink on camera. I don't know. So, but we all do have these triggers. So one of the exercises that I do often with my clients that I think is really important is to outline 5 things you don't want to be known for at work. All right. So 5 things I don't want to be known for at work would be a micromanager. It's not my style. I hate being micromanaged. I don't want to be a micromanager. Another thing would be too in the weeds, right? I don't want to be sucked too far in the weeds, that I'm focused on all the details. I'm not thinking strategically. I'm not innovating. I don't have a vision. I'm not pushing the team forward, right? Another thing I don't want to be known for at work is being the fixer. Now, I am a jack of all trades. I am the person you call in to fix different situations, but I don't only want to be the person who fixes issues. I want to be able to push the business forward. I want to think at a higher level. I want to be seen as a thought leader. So just being a fixer, a tactical individual, does not align with my long-term goals, right? So those are 3 examples, but you would come up with a list of 5. These are 5 things I don't want to be known for. Now, we draw on life experience. Odds are you know somebody who does every single one of those 5 things that you don't want to be known for. And human nature says that we take the expectations we have for ourselves and we project them on other people. Okay, this is very natural. It's very, very common. And so we say, hey, well, I don't want to be known for these things. This person's doing one of those things. I don't like them. And sometimes we can't even explain why we don't like a person. We could just say, something about them really bothers me. But then if we look at those 5 things we don't want to be known for, odds are they do at least one of them. So once we know the 5 things we don't want to be known for, we can create what I call reaction mitigation tools that allow us to go into situations more prepared. So for example, micromanagement. If somebody tries to micromanage me, I'm going to have a really negative reaction to it. And the reason for that is because I don't want to be that way. And I now project that expectation on other people, and I have a negative reaction when somebody tries to do it to me. So a reaction mitigation tool for that would be, I've noticed lately that you are asking for a lot more updates than normal. Is there something that you're trying to accomplish that I could be more proactive in my communication to help you feel comfortable with? What is it that you need and with what frequency so that I can start to push information to you more proactively rather than you having to try and pull? Right? That would be a reaction mitigation tool that I would use. When that happens, my knee-jerk reaction is going to be to go to that statement. It's not going to be to say, get off my back. It's not going to be fine and hand over a bunch of information. It's going to be, hey, you're reaching out for a lot more details lately. Is there something you're trying to do? How can I proactively help you? Okay, that would be a tool set that I would have that sentence ready in my back pocket all the time so that when that happens, boom, this is what I'm going to do in that situation. It allows us to have an appropriate real-time response. Okay. For somebody who, say, wants to be very calm and one of their don't want to be known for is having like an off the handle temper. Well, if somebody flies off the handle in a call with you, your knee jerk reaction is to get very upset with them because they're doing the exact thing you're trying not to do. So in that situation, a tool set that we would have is the louder they get, the quieter we get. Right? The louder this individual becomes, the more frustrated, the more angry, we're going to lower our voice. I can see you're really agitated about this. Would you like to pause this discussion and come back to it tomorrow? We want to have a response prepared. We want to have a communication style prepared for these situations where we know we're going to get triggered, because that's going to help us maintain emotional distance. Rather than getting invested in their response, rather than feeling as though we have to react, we can have reactions ready for the things that bother us most. Now, we're not going to be 100% with this. Everybody give themselves some grace. There are times, my husband jokes, there was a call a couple of months ago where somebody said something and I didn't agree, not my finest moment. And I basically went, no, that's wrong. Okay. And I do this for a living, right? We are all going to have days where we're just like over it and the response doesn't come out the right way. But on the whole, if we are proactive and we create these tool sets to go with the things that bother us most, we're going to react better in a stressful situation. One of my big triggers is being told to take on too much work, right? I really don't like when somebody creates a policy, for example, that adds a lot of effort to one side of the company and then basically expects people to fall in line. It's a big trigger of mine. But my reactive mitigation tool is, great, what resources do we have to support this change? That is my knee-jerk response. It used to be, no, I can't do that. I'm too busy. I'm overwhelmed. This is never going to work. It used to be a lot of negativity. But now this tool set that I've built out, my natural response is, great, what resources do we have to support this change, as this is incremental effort for the team? Then if the answer is, well, no, we don't have any resources, we say, okay, well, what are we trading off for this? This is going to increase our workload by X%. We're not getting more people. That's fine. But what are we not doing to make space for this? People tend to have a much better reaction in those types of conversations, and it tends to lead to ideation and solutioning. And they may even roll the policy back and say, well, we don't have time. We can't deprioritize any of these other things. We don't have people to give you. And you say, okay, great. Is there a way to delay the rollout of this policy then until Jan 1 when I can get more resources? Then it allows for collaborative conversation. The third piece of emotional distance is having your tools ready when people do things to upset you or that aggravate you so that you can respond in the most positive way possible for yourself. This is going to allow things to stay calmer. They're not going to escalate. And for those of you who've listened to my podcast for an extended period of time, early on in my career, I was terrible at all of these things I'm describing. Okay. That's why I know these things work, because I was very emotionally connected to my work early on in my career. I would argue. I wanted my solution. I wanted it my way. I would even go into meetings, and if it was something that I didn't think was valuable, I would knock out the work during that meeting, send it out 15 minutes in and leave. Okay. Very abrasive, very direct, not a good team player. Okay. This was me early on in my career. I was also very emotionally volatile to what I felt like was being slighted. If somebody tried to micromanage me, I got really agitated. I would potentially yell or raise my voice or get frustrated or leave a room. If somebody came after me and tried to get me to do something that was really, really detail oriented, or they were being really nitpicky, but in the end, the solution stayed the same, I got really frustrated, didn't see the value in it, tended to be very reactionary. The same was true if I was trying to have if somebody came at me or I felt like they were putting up a roadblock for what I was trying to accomplish. I could potentially fly off the handle on them. I could escalate to my boss, right? All of the wrong reactions you can think of. This is how I started my career. Okay. And I always find it interesting because people that I've worked with before sometimes will be surprised that this is what I do for a living now. And it's because I had to learn all of these skills in order to progress in corporate. And I work with people all day, every day who say, well, I just want to be able to show up and do my work and go home. I don't want to have to do all this stuff. That's great. That's nice. It's not how corporate works. We have to learn these skills to improve. And emotional distance is a huge one because when we're emotionally connected to the work, when we're emotionally connected to how we feel at the workplace, to our peers, that's when all of our reactions escalate. And when those reactions escalate, we're going to create a negative work environment and we're going to halt our own progress. So it's really, really important to be able to do this. Now, I've given a lot of tactical things that you can do throughout this conversation. But the reason this is really important is because at some point, your job becomes more about managing the emotional workload than the physical workload. I talked to a client, in fact, earlier today, where we were talking about their natural instinct is it's very disagree. It's very, I don't want to do this. This doesn't make sense. It doesn't have the context. It doesn't. And when we get to that space and we're trying to move up, eventually we're going to hit a ceiling where the boss says, listen, you're too in the weeds. You're too tactical. You're too negative. You're too abrasive. You're too direct. And if we want to keep that growth progressing, we have to learn to manage the emotional side. Now, this particular client just made that jump to the emotional side and was like, this is completely different. It's not about at all if I can execute the technical work. And I had a leader say this to me once, I 100% agree with it. They said, at some point in your seniority, it becomes more about chemistry than skill. So true. Can you build strong chemistry, strong relationships, strong communication with the people you need to work with? That will ultimately end up becoming more important in your career than your ability to tactically execute a job. And that's because at those senior levels of leadership, you're providing guidance, you're providing direction, you're managing, you're leading, but you're also dealing with all of the politics at the top of the house. And all of that requires that emotional maturity and that ability to take a step back. It also requires an ability to admit when you're wrong, to give gratitude and thanks and recognition to the individuals who support you, right? These are other skills that go with that if you want to be a non-toxic leader, right? Which I assume everybody listening does. So I'm hoping today's episode was really helpful. Creating emotional distance gives us the ability to take a step back. It gives us the ability to really create space for ourselves to operate well without feeling like we have to jump on everything. The second piece of this, and this is something else that I want to touch on, is a lot of the time, it's not even about our own expectations for ourselves that we're worried about failing. It's the expectations of other people. And we get in our heads and we get insecure and we think, well, I don't know if my boss likes me, or I don't know if this coworker is getting what they need. And sometimes we're proven right, where we think we're doing a great job and somebody comes to us and says, hey, you didn't meet my expectations on this. And we're completely shocked. So something that I like to build out in my general tool set that I'll share with you guys is asking the question, in this project, in this role, with this task, what are your expectations for me in this role? I'd love to hear if there's anything that you're looking for me to do that you're not currently seeing. That 1 to 2 sentences with your boss, with your project lead, with your coworker, with your colleague makes such a huge difference in not only how you're executing, because it allows you to meet their expectations, but also their perception of you. Because they may share something in that conversation. Well, hey, I actually expected that you would run point on these meetings more. And you had no idea and thought they wanted to run the meeting. Well, that changes how we show up. That improves their perception of us because once they communicate it, we step in and do the work that we're expected to do. So if you're in an environment where you feel someone else is having an emotional response to you, right? They seem frustrated with you, they're short, they're negative, or you feel that they may not be pleased with how you're assisting in a particular. Having this two-way conversation of, hey, what expectations do you have for me? And is there anything that you expect that I'm not currently doing? That can smooth over a lot of issues. It can fix a lot of problems. And so that's how we can proactively pull this exercise from other people. Because once you create emotional distance and once you're able to execute at a higher level of thought, you'll start to see the people who are very reactionary the way you used to be. And rather than react back or stay too calm and then they're frustrated for a different reason, this conversation about expectation setting allows us to clear the air and make forward progress in those relationships. So hopefully you guys found this helpful. If you did, go ahead and leave me 5 stars below. Leave any comments or questions that you have for any future episodes. I'm happy to answer them. But as always, I'm Kendall Berg, that career coach, and thank you for listening to this episode of Secrets of the Corporate Game.